Today we are at Living Arts in downtown Tulsa in the Brady District, and we are looking at a new exhibition called Wundrian, and it is a collaborative exhibition by J.P. Morrison Lands, R.C. Morrison, Chris Woolard, as well as a group of artists called ETA. And the concept of the show is looking at houses as an anthropomorphic object, sort of encouraging self-reflection, something that the artist is really interested in terms of how people see houses, but also how houses can be, how houses can embody ideas and embody sort of a self-portrait. And from the artist statement, we get this interesting idea that is sort of traditional in psychology, that when a child draws a house, that certain elements of the house are is the way that the child sort of approaches their sense of self and their understanding of the world.
Exactly. So perhaps if a child draws shutters or drapery in the windows, the idea is that they're trying to block off or some kind of hiding or separating from the outside world. And so in these pieces, we see kind of something similar to that come through in the way that we have this long row of houses that's very American dream, cookie cutter, sprawl type neighborhood. And a few of them really stand out in different ways. So we have one that's grayed, one that has kind of a puff of smoke coming out through the chimney. But most of them really focus on the exterior and concealing the interior, with the exception of one.
Yeah, so this one's really interesting. It's called Keeping Secrets, and we have this sort of grimaced face, sort of smile-like, possibly not smile-like, that fills the house that's been turned on its end. And one of the things that we're really picking up in the entire show is this sort of push and pull between exterior and interior. We're presented so much with the exterior of the house. We have all the same frames. As we move around, you'll see ones that focus on really just the metal frame. But this one gives us a small sort of insight into the interior of the house. But the face really fills up the space and blocks a real understanding of the entirety of the interior. And so there's this sort of small glimpse of life inside the house, but yet not a full understanding of the interior. And so we're still left with a bit of the mystery.
And it's also interesting the way that it's placed on the shelf so that it's not very blatantly open to the viewer. You have to kind of peek around and inside.
Yeah.
You have to be interested in knowing what's on the inside.
Yeah, and if you actually just continued sort of down the line and didn't turn back, you wouldn't even see it. It wouldn't even occur to you. And so there's a little bit of a bit of catching something by surprise. They've sort of left you a little bit of a clue or a little mystery to enjoy that probably not everybody saw as they came in if they just sort of kept their back to it.
Yeah, exactly. And so a few other houses that are interesting, again, going back to the artist statement, they mention this idea of a raised house being a child that's out of this world or not of this world, which I guess could be interpreted many different ways. So we actually have 4 houses that are floating in different ways. One with this lit plexiglass. And what's the title of this piece again?
So this one is Stilt House, I think.
Okay, and then the next one is Sassy House, with the tongue possibly alluding to popular culture, Miley Cyrus,
Yeah.
being sassy.
But also maybe sort of, I read that too as sort of childlike, sort of making fun, sticking your tongue out and sort of mocking in some ways. It's a very sort of childlike, behavior.
It kind of also makes me think of a child and how it could be kind of an abstracted view of like a tree house, how it's kind of up on these wooden stilts that also has kind of a playful tone to it. But I think maybe the most elaborate is this piece, which is very kind of dreamy, and we know that from the title called The Dream. And you have this house kind of floating on this lit up cloud, which it's also interesting because they've used the wire that obviously is the means to illuminate it, but also as part of the piece where it kind of looks like a balloon on a string, something that could easily be caught and float away.
Yeah, it's a small sort of tether in some ways, like flying a kite. It's held very loosely, so there's not the sense that it's totally escaping the control of the hand, although it's obviously sort of in some ways out of their control. And it speaks to, I think, this idea of this floating or this sort of levitation of, a home is supposed to be a very sort of stable thing, and yet we have so many of them that are in some way, or they're just sort of slightly off the ground or out of your grasp, or there's something, so that the concept of the home becomes slightly elusive in some way.
Yeah, which I think really is an overarching theme throughout the show, is trying to define what is a home. So obviously in this exhibition, we're looking at this very kind of Western idea with a pitched roof and a chimney as this idea of home, and trying to figure out and discern, like, what does that mean to have a home? Is it the outside, the actual structure of the home, or is it what happens inside? Which I think a lot of these pieces are playing with that push and pull of what's inside and concealed or revealed in some cases, compared to what's on the outside.
Right. And so we come to the end of this long row, and then we have this great sort of curatorial choice here that I think we both really love, which is the shadow of a house that is not on the wall, but it's across on a pedestal, and it's the same shape as the others, but it's this metal house with this sort of tinfoil escaping, smoke or cloud or some sort of floating material. But in the way that it's done, it is shown against the long wall with the shelf of houses, as well as on another wall, and the LED light continues to change, and so we have this great sense of the house sort of appearing sort of more formed in some sense, and then it sort of slightly goes out of focus as the light changes, and then it comes back. And so again, it's very sort of elusive. The only thing I wished is, and I think you feel the same way, is we wish the pedestal height had matched up so that the shadow would be sort of perfect on that shelf. But still, it's a really interesting way that they've extended the row, in several ways.
And this piece also picks up something that we haven't touched on very much yet, which is the use of light and color. So throughout the exhibition, there's several pieces that are using LED lights, and also several spots that change colors, which then affect how the piece itself changes. So as you mentioned, the different colors that are used on this, we actually have two lights that are showing on it. And as they change separately, you get kind of this constant change of color. And also, as you mentioned, this coming in and out of focus, but then also, again, this kind of foil or reflective material that's coming out of the house is constantly changing as well as it's picking up those colors from the lights.
Mm-hmm. And I think that was something that was of particular interest to the collaborators, was the use of lights and the way that we perceive objects not only in colored light, but colored light that sort of constantly changes. And that brings us to one of sort of the most interesting pieces, which was a collaborative live painting event that the group did for the First Friday event. And we're not entirely sure on our Latin, but we think it's Analisho. But it basically translates to mean iridescence, or the play of colors on like a gem-like surface. And it's one of the few houses that viewers can actually enter, which again it kind of comes back to this idea of interior and exterior. And we've got a flashing light that sort of goes across the entire the entire structure. And so the colors really change. The pinks become sort of darker pink, lighter pink, and I wasn't here for the painting, for the live painting, but I would imagine as it sort of took shape, that the audience really would have started to see sort of the things that make a home kind of start to come together. That it's a building process. That it's not just the actual structure of a house, but what comes together is the activity inside the house and the things of life that happen that make it all of a sudden a home and make it sort of uniquely special rather than just this structure you just sort of moved into.
Yeah, and I really like this idea where we have this collaborative artist group that work, on several things together as a group, but it also kind of speaks to me in the historical sense of barn raisings or house raisings. And so you bring together your community to literally build your house. And so I think also from an artist perspective, this might have been a challenge because your canvas, in this case, this plastic material, as the lights are shining on it, is constantly changing. So in 1 second you can see the brushstroke you just made, and in the next you can't because the color has changed. And so as these lights are changing, we again have this kind of push and pull, or this receding and then coming to the forefront depending on the color of the paint, matching or contrasting to the light that's being shown on it, which we also see in some two-dimensional pieces that JP has done. And as you stand there and watch them for several seconds, different parts of it come out where you can see it.
Yeah, the colors really change, and the pieces, I think, take on sort of different moods. And they become sort of, at one moment, sort of melancholy, and the next minute, just sort of beautifully done. I think as you look at these drawings, you can construct lots of different sort of scenarios. We have sort of the idyllic couple here, standing here. They look very sort of perfect American. They kind of match, these perfect American houses that are built, that sprawl across the suburbs. And we have this cute little sort of impish child here. And so we have this very sort of, classic American ideals of family and homes. And yet the way that the light changes and the exposed parts of the bodies on the couple give you this sense of maybe not something darker, but definitely a sense of tension right under the surface.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that keeps coming up repeatedly in this exhibition and in our conversation around it as well, is a couple different binaries possibly of the inside versus the outside, or the definition of a home being the actual structure or the family relationships, things that go on within the home that then defines what a home actually is.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting exhibition, and we encourage people to come see it. The show will be on view until April 23rd. It's at Living Arts in downtown Tulsa. And thanks so much for watching our video.